Amen. Well, welcome to Redemption Church. My name is Caleb. I'm one of the pastors here on staff. I'm grateful that you're here and here in person. For those of you that are watching online, thank you for tuning in. We've been in the book of Matthew now for a little over 2 years. We believe here at Redemption that Scripture, the whole of the Bible, is sufficient for all of life. You know, and when we preach through passages of Scripture verse by verse, it's very difficult to skip over the hard stuff or skip over the stuff that is hard to understand. And so we've just been going verse by verse through the Gospel of Matthew, which is the first account in the New Testament of the life of Jesus. We're in chapter 16 right now, and we're starting there. So if you have your Bibles, you can pull that out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read actually the first 12 verses of Matthew 16 as we get started. So the words will be up on the screen as well for you to read along if you'd like. It says this in verse 1. The Pharisees and the Sadducees came, and to test him, being Jesus, they asked him to show them a sign from heaven. He answered them, when it is evening, you say, it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, it will be stormy today, for the sky is red and threatening. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times. An evil and adulterous generation seeks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of Jonah. So he left them and departed. Verse 5, when the disciples reached the other side, they had forgotten to bring any bread. Jesus said to them, watch and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. And they began discussing it amongst themselves, saying, we brought no bread. But Jesus, aware of this, said, O you of little faith, why are you discussing among yourselves the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive? Do you not remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000 and how many baskets you gathered? Or the 7 loaves for the 4,000 and how many baskets you gathered? How is it that you fail to understand that I did not speak about bread? Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Then they understood that he did not tell them to beware of the leaven of bread, but of the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees. So in our previous chapter, 15, we spent 3 weeks in chapter 15. We see that Jesus is over on the east side of the Sea of Galilee. He's in the Gentile region of that area, and he's crossing back over into the Jewish region, the Israel region, and he's once again, he's confronted by the Pharisees. And so Jesus does battle with them. He confronts with them. There's a lot of conversations that he has with them. He confronts them. He does battle with them. Then he leaves and he goes and talks to his disciples and he tests them over food. And so if you were reading this in your personal devotion, like the ESV version, it has 2 separate paragraphs. You would read it as 2 separate things. Jesus does battle with the Pharisees, and then he says, hey, watch out for those guys. But when you look at it, there's actually a little bit more going on in both of these conversations. And so looking at verses 1 through 4 again, it says the Pharisees and the Sadducees came. Now, if you grew up in church like I did, you know who the Pharisees are. These are the religious teachers that Jesus is always getting in trouble with. You know, they're the ones that he does regular confrontations with them. He's always bumping into them. They're always causing trouble for him. But then you hear about the Sadducees and you go, well, who are the Sadducees? They're kind of like the Pharisees, but they're a little bit different. Who are those guys? Well, I've started reading some fantasy novels that I read when I was a kid, one of them being The Hobbit. And I actually got my daughter, my 5-year-old, into the 1977 animated adaptation of it. So like the Rankin and Bass animated classic, The Hobbit, right? This is way better than Peter Jackson's version, but that's a different rant for a different sermon. But just say, like, listen, this is a great adaptation of it. And so what happens in The Hobbit is you have Bilbo Baggins, you have Gandalf the Wizard, and you have the 13 dwarves, and they're journeying across Middle-earth to reclaim the Lonely Mountain and recapture the gold that had been stolen by them and kind of driven them out by the dragon Smaug. And along the way, they meet up with a couple of different people groups. They're captured by goblins. They meet the elves of Rivendell and the men of Lake Town. They're captured by the elves that are in Mirkwood and the spiders and all these different things. And at the end of the book, at the end of the movie, they are in the mountain. The dwarves and Bilbo are in the mountain, and they've reclaimed the gold. Smaug is dead, and the elves and the men that they've run into along the way say, we actually have a claim to the gold as well. They say, we want a piece of the gold. And the dwarves, they're greedy. They say, no, this is ours. These are our families. Before we were driven out, it's all ours. You can't have any of it. And so the 3 armies, the elves, the men, and the dwarves are getting ready to go into battle. And as they get ready, they're marching down the line. Gandalf the wizard stops and says, wait, you guys need to pay attention to this. There's another army coming. The goblins are coming. And they don't care about any of you guys. Or they're going to claim the gold and the mountain for themselves. And so in this last moment of desperation and self-preservation, the three armies basically make a pact like, we're going to defend everything against the goblins and we'll just split the gold among ourselves, right? And the eagles come and there's 5 armies and it's really cool. It's a great battle. Anyway, so watch it for yourself, read it for yourself. So in Israel, there is the ruling council of Israel, which is the Sanhedrin. And of the ruling council of the Sanhedrin, there are 2 factions of men that are the Pharisees and the Sadducees. These are basically the religious and political oppositional parties that led Israel at the time. And these 2 were very diametrically opposed. The Pharisees were the very conservative religious and political establishment. They wanted to keep the traditions of their forefathers, and it makes sense that Jesus is doing battle with them because he teaches a lot like the way that they teach. And the main difference between the Pharisees and the Sadducees is that the Sadducees, unlike the Pharisees, they do not believe in the resurrection of the dead. That's their primary argument. The Sadducees, they're the liberals. They are they're fine with doing away with the tradition. They're fine with adopting whatever's new at that time. And what was new at that time was this Greek influence, this Greek thought. And so these 2 groups would normally not get along. And so it actually kind of tells you a little bit about something with the way Israel's relationship with Jesus was, at least from the top down, is that these 2 opposing influences came together in opposition, in allegiance, in opposition to Jesus. If you read the Bible if we had like a USA version of the Bible, right? 21st century USA version of the Bible, it would read like this. And the Republicans and the Democrats came, and to test him, they asked him to show them a sign from heaven. That's what it's like. You would read that and you'd be like, well, that's interesting. Those 2 that really don't get along, they're kind of going after Jesus together. In fact, when you get to the book of Acts, later on in the New Testament, in Acts chapter 23, you have the Apostle Paul who is standing before this exact same council, the Sanhedrin, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and he's on trial for preaching about Jesus. And Paul is a very shrewd man, and he comes to them and he says, listen, the reason why I'm here today has nothing to do with Jesus. It's because I'm a Pharisee and I believe in the resurrection of the dead. And the Sadducees go, obviously there's no resurrection of the dead. And this riot breaks out among the ruling council, and Paul essentially goes free. And so you see these 2 groups that do not get along at all. And so when representatives, leaders of those 2 opposing parties who absolutely hate each other's guts join in opposition to Jesus, something big is coming on. When the Republicans and Democrats agree, we don't want you, that says something, right? The most stark division in all of Israel is healed in its opposition to Jesus, and that's what's going on in this passage. So these 2 groups, they're willing to set aside very significant differences in order to together reject Jesus. And they go up to him and they say, we want to see a sign from you, Jesus. We want to see something from you. And this isn't the first time it's happened. So in chapter 12, the Pharisees by themselves come to Jesus and they say the same thing. And Jesus is having none of that at the time, right? And rightfully so, because up until that point, Jesus has already done so many things. He's already proven himself in so many different ways. He's raised the dead, he's healed the blind, he's healed lepers, the lame can walk, the blind can see, the deaf can hear. He's done everything he possibly can to show them that they need to listen to his voice and that his words are God's words. And they say, not good enough. We need something else. Which in and of itself is kind of this apologetic for the fact that I think the Bible is true, because it doesn't just tell us who Jesus is, who God is, it kind of tells us who we are as well. The Pharisees and the Sadducees, they're very much like their forefathers in Israel. When you go back, all the way back to Exodus, you have the Israelites who are in slavery in Egypt. God comes to Pharaoh. He says, I could kill you right now, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to show you and the world that I'm the only God, I'm the true and living God, Yahweh. And so he sends 10 powerful signs, these 10 plagues to the Egyptians. And the Israelites go free, and they're free, and they go up to the edge of the Red Sea, and Pharaoh has sent his army after the Israelites, and what do? God sent us out here to die. He doesn't care about us. He doesn't love us. We need something else from you. And they parts the Red Sea and they cross over and they get over to the other side. And what do? We don't have any food. We don't have any water. God has sent us out here to die. We need something else from you, God. And time after time, the Israelites continue to go, God, we need something else from you for us to trust in you, for us to believe in you. You got to do something else for us. So one sign is never enough. Once is never enough. We need something else. And that's what the Pharisees and the Sadducees are doing. And that brings me to kind of this point that I want us to wrap our heads around, is that true faith trusts in what God has already revealed. True faith trusts in what God has already revealed. You see, God has provided more than enough evidence for the Pharisees to believe. Jesus has provided more than enough evidence for all of Israel to believe, and yet they demand something else. And that's the way they are, and that's the way you and I are, right? If we're being honest, that's just the way people are. You see, God has not just spoken through the law and the prophets. He's come down, he's put flesh and blood on, and he's showed himself to them, and they say, we need something else. And when you think back to Ross's message last week, Ross said that faith must be buried to blossom. The problem is that sometimes we can't get past the burial. We can't see past the darkness. Some of us are in here and we heard that message and we thought, okay, I just need to pray more. And you have a very real prayer concern. You have a prayer concern regarding, your finances, or something that's happening in your work environment. You're underneath a manager or a management team that just isn't a good management team. Or you have a child that is wayward and you want them to come back to God. You want them to come back to Jesus. And so you went, okay, faith needs to be buried to blossom. Okay, you prayed on Sunday and you didn't hear anything. And you prayed on Monday and you didn't hear anything. And you prayed on Tuesday. And then by Thursday, you're like, well, God clearly doesn't care. If God were loving, he wouldn't. If God were all powerful, he wouldn't. And truthfully, for most of us, or myself included, this demand for God to show himself is not an excuse to not believe. It's an excuse to get out from underneath authority. The Pharisees say, any God but you. We will serve the Caesar in Rome who we hate if we don't have to listen to you. Jesus, we don't believe you. We need something else. And so Jesus tells them, you're going to get something. You're going to get a sign. Verse 4. An evil and adulterous generation seeks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of Jonah. Jesus says the same thing in chapter 12 when they approach him the same way. What is the sign of Jonah? It's not just that Jonah was in the fish for 3 days, and in the same way, Jesus will be in the earth for 3 days, and he's going to come back. There's a little bit more to that. Do you remember the book of Jonah? Like what the book of Jonah is actually about? What is Jonah angry about? We have the children's storybook Bible with our kids, and we read that to them. And conspicuously, chapter 4 is left out of the Jesus storybook Bible, and it's left out a lot of children's stories. I remember reading it the first time and going, whoa, Jonah's angry at God? What is he angry at God about? Why is Jonah, he's angry for the same reason why he refused to go to Nineveh in the first place. A lot of times people are like, oh, he was scared. He didn't like the Ninevites. He probably didn't. That's true. He probably did hate the Ninevites, but it wasn't just that he hated those people. It was because God had made promises to Israel that we can read about in the Old Testament. Deuteronomy specifically. I don't have time to read the whole thing, but in Deuteronomy chapter 28, God promises blessings for obedience and curses for disobedience. And in one instance of this curse is that if you are worshiping these false gods, I'm going to remove my hand of blessing for you, and I'm going to allow another nation to take your place. And so what's happening at the time of Jonah? Israel is full of idol worship. Baal and Ashtoreth, and there's no worship of God, and so they worship demons instead of God. And so what does God promise? That if he goes after false gods, if they go after false gods, he's going to go after another nation. And so when Jonah hears God going, hey, I want you to go to Nineveh, it's this evil city, I want you to preach at it. At the end, Jonah's like, this is why I didn't want to do it, because I knew that you're merciful. I knew that if I went to them and told them that God, you're going to destroy them, that is an act of mercy. God, me saying this is gracious to them because I knew that you were going to save them. And that's, of course, what God did. God knew that the promise that God made, that he was going to go to the Gentile nations and abandon Israel and raise up those Gentile nations against Israel was going to happen. And that's the sign of Jonah. That Israel is going to be judged if they worship other gods and they reject Jesus. Jonah knew that's what they were doing, and that was the first step of those things. And so when you think back to last week, where is Jesus? He's in the Gentile region, and he runs up against a Canaanite woman, and this Canaanite woman asks for help, and how does Jesus initially respond to her? He's kind of rude to her, right? He says, I'm supposed to go to Israel, not the Gentiles. It's almost like Jonah acting towards the Ninevites. Jesus is a little bit Jonah-like in his response to her. The previous chapter is this preview of the sign of Jonah. And it's that if Israel rejects Jesus as God, he's going to leave them. He's going to go somewhere else, and he's going to provoke the Israelites to jealousy. Jesus going to the Gentiles is good news for you and I, but it's bad news for Israel. And so Jesus tells the Pharisees, I'm going to go to this other nation. I'm going to send you the sign of Jonah. And he leaves them with that to chew on, and he goes to the disciples. And Matthew, who is one of the disciples, puts in this interesting factoid, and he says the disciples forgot to bring food on this long trip with Jesus. And you're like, well, what's the big deal? They forgot to bring food. Well, in the pre-modern world, what you had on your trip was what you brought with you, right? You're walking everywhere. Maybe you're taking a boat, but you're walking everywhere. You're 15, 20, 30 miles away from the nearest city. And so if you forgot food, well, then that's what you have. You're not going to Publix and just picking up a snack on the way. You know, I have 2 little girls, and so that's the first question when we get in the car. Do we have something to eat? It's like, yes, baby, we have snack. You have gummies. Okay, I have something for you. And so that's on the front of their mind, right? And Jesus said something strange to them. He says, watch and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. And that's an unfamiliar phrase to us. It's so unfamiliar that we probably don't even stop to think about what that means. Right? But to the group of men who are already thinking about bread and who are hungry, they put 2 and 2 together and they get 5. And they say, okay, so Jesus said, don't buy bread from them. Okay, cool. All right, well, we won't buy bread from the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Don't buy the Pharisee bread, right? That's what they think. And Jesus goes, no, that's not at all what I'm talking about. He says this in verse 8. Oh, you of little faith, why are you discussing among yourselves the fact that you have no bread? Jesus is like, you think I can't make up bread? There were 5,000 people. You didn't witness that I just made bread appear for 5,000 people. You're hungry. That's your concern. But he goes a little bit deeper even than that. He expects them to understand the symbolic numbers that he talks about there as well. He says, remember when I fed 5,000 people? How many baskets were left over? There were 12. When I fed 4,000 people, how many baskets were left over? There were 7. He brings up these numerological points and he expects them to understand the meaning. Sometimes when we're reading the Bible, if you read it and you look at numbers and you go, what's the symbolism here? I don't know, maybe that's what God meant. I'm not sure about that. And Jesus is going, no, that's exactly what I meant here. There's meaning, there's significance to these numbers. And not only is there significance, I want you to know what that significance is. And so when we talked about these miracles a few months back, we talked about what is the meaning of 12 baskets left over? Well, Jesus is in the Israelite region, and so he's feeding 5,000 people, and the 12 baskets represent the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 nations of Israel. And then the feeding of the 4,000 happens in the Gentile region, and he has 7 baskets left over. So in Israel, he's reminding them the 12 tribes of Israel, I am here, I am to provide nourishment and food, and I am the bread of life for the 12 nations of Israel. And then the Gentiles, 7 signifies like totality, completion of creation. He says, I am here as well for the nourishment of all of creation. And so that's what he means. Again, if you look at that again, he goes first to the Israelites and then second to the Gentiles, and he expects his disciples to figure out what that means. And again, I think this is a good reminder and a good apologetic for the veracity and the truth of the Bible. The fact that the Bible is so simple to understand that, my 5 and 2-year-old can kind of at least grasp just simple, important truths. And yet many of us in here who have been studying the Bible for years, we barely just scratch the surface of it. You have scholars that debate it for decades over the meaning of certain verses and certain words within verses. And so there's no other book in recorded human history that is like that is so simple that a child can understand it, and so deep that the most brilliant minds in all of human history can't fully deduce and decipher what that means. And he says, I want you to do that. I want you to know when I'm speaking literally. I want you to understand when I'm speaking figuratively. And I want you to understand that I'm not talking about bread, I'm talking about the teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And he's telling them that true faith rejects false teaching. I need you to be concerned with the doctrine and the teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And he says, beware of the leaven. Well, what is leaven? In the pre-modern world, if you wanted to bake bread, you didn't do it the same way we do it now. Like the bread that they had in the ancient world, and up until about 100 or so years ago, was not go to the store and get a packet of Fleischmann's dry yeast and pour it into your bread and bake that. If you wanted your bread to rise, what did you do? You put flour and water in a jar or in a pot, and you'd let it sit there. You'd mix it together and you let it sit, and it would collect yeast from the air, and it would rise and it would ferment, and then you could mix it in with the rest of your dough. During COVID, this was like a big thing. After you guys cleared the stores of toilet paper, there was a massive run on yeast, to the point that even today, 5 years later, there's still issues in certain parts of the United States where like you can't find yeast in grocery stores. And I think, a lot of people are like, well, I guess I have to live off the land now, so I'm gonna bake my own bread, right? And so some people, my wife included, was like, there's no more yeast, let me just do this myself. And so kind of sourdough became a big thing over the last couple of years again, and started to make a bit of a comeback. And so you put water and flour in a jar, you stir it up, and you let it ferment, and it's become this kind of more familiar thing for us. And so this leaven, this starter, this sourdough starter could go for dozens and dozens, even hundreds of years. There's like different families in Germany that claim that their sourdough starter is 400 years old. Like they still have theirs from the Black Plague. There's a bakery. There's a bakery in France that's been around since 1932. It's called the Poilâne Bakery. It's this little tiny hole in the wall off a side street in Paris. And it says this on their website: Poilâne breads are made using a slow sourdough fermentation process. This specific process creates breads to the Poilâne loaf its unique characteristics, both gustatory and nutritional. The use of the natural leaven and the lactic fermentation is a choice that Poilâne is proud to have perpetuated since 1932. This 93-year-old sourdough starter they use today to make bread. This is one of the meanings of leaven in the Bible, is that it's continuity. Because you didn't have packets of yeast to make bread, it would just take time and it would be continuous. This process is what leaven actually is. You take the starter, you leave it behind for the next batch. And so when God is telling the Israelites in Exodus, at the Passover, you have to get rid of the bread and you have to bake bread with new leaven, what he's saying is not throw out all of your Fleischmann's dry yeast. You have to wash out that dough. You have to wash the dough out of that pot, and you have to start over, because the continuity and the old way of life in Egypt is done, and I'm cutting that off. And I'm starting something new, and you need to start something new when you get out of Egypt. And so every year at Passover, that's what would happen. The Jews, they would go in and they would wash out their dough, and they would create a new starter for the new year, because it's a reminder that the old life is gone and the new life is come. And so that continuity year after year would end right there. And so that's what leaven means. It means continuity, but leaven means something else as well. You see, true faith doesn't just reject false teaching. True faith spreads the truth. And that's what leaven Jesus is talking about when he says in Matthew 13, he gives a parable about leaven. He says this: the kingdom of heaven is like a leaven that a woman took and hid in 3 measurements of flour till it was all leavened. Leaven is not just about continuity. Leaven grows. Leaven expands. Leaven gets into everything. And that's what happens when you add that leaven, that starter, into your loaf. It's just in that little piece at first. But it's this living organism, the yeast, that gets into the rest of the bread that causes it to rise. And so in the context of the kingdom of heaven, leaven is a good thing. But in the context of the unbelieving Israel, and the unbelieving leaders of Israel, it's bad. You don't want the leaven of the Pharisees, of the Sadducees to get into anything because it will continue to spread and distort. You don't want that. Jesus is saying, cut that off. I'm starting something new. This is not going to be passed down anymore. What I'm doing is new, and it needs to be cut off of the old ways of Israel. Next week, we're actually going to talk about kind of the beginning of that. Next week, Jesus has what I consider to be the most important conversation he's ever had with his disciples in all of the four Gospels. He asked the disciples, "Who do you think I am?" And it is based upon Peter's profession of faith that Jesus says, "This is the new thing that I'm starting." And he says, and he's telling us today, you have to cut that off because I'm starting something new. And that's what Jesus is saying to his disciples. You're this new loaf. You're this new loaf that I'm making. This loaf cannot come into contact with the old loaf. And so for us, it's the same. You are that new loaf. You are the loaf of bread that belongs to Jesus. The church of Jesus Christ that he's preparing and that he's needing. It's this leaven that he's introduced to you. Paul says it this way in 1 Corinthians. Chapter 5, he says, "Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? Cleanse out the old leaven that you may be a new lump as you really are unleavened." This old leaven, this old way of sin and malice and envy and being okay with the things that God hates, that cannot come into contact with this new loaf. That cannot come into contact with this new leaven. The ways of sin cannot get into contact with the ways of Christ because it will eventually erode and corrode everything, because that's what leaven does. It just gets into everything. And in the same way, the leaven of God that you and I are, he's breaking bits of that off, and that's what he's using to feed the world. If you are a new creation, if you are in Christ, then you are part of that. And when he takes you and he places you in the place, in the work life that he's placed you in the family that he's placed you in the neighborhood that he's placed you in, it's so that you, with your leaven, can spread that to the people that you are around. If you are incorporated into Christ's body, you are his loaf, and it's that loaf that he uses to feed the world. And so there's some things that I want us to consider. There's some things that I want us to think about this week. The first is this. I want you to examine your faith. Examine your faith. Are your doubts really doubts? Or is it just this unwillingness to submit to the authority of God? Are you constantly saying, "God, I just need this raise. God, I just need this relationship to work. God, if this thing comes through for me, if this financial burden is lifted, then I'll trust you. God, if this person would come and return to our family, or this friend, this wayward friend or this wayward child, if they would come back, then I could trust you." What I would suggest is that you should sit back first this week and reflect on what has God already done. How has he already revealed himself to you? Whether it's through his word, whether it's through the things that he has already done in your life, whether it's the things that he has done in the lives of those that are around you. That you may have friends or family that you're praying for, and you see God come through for them. And while there might be this sense of bitterness or pride, what we should do is you should go, "God, you're working in their life. I can see you doing something in their life." And so that should be enough. Can we examine our faith? Can we examine our doubts? And can we say, "God, am I really just needing something more, or is it a symptom of my desire to be out from underneath your authority?" And so if you're in here today and you're not a believer, I would submit that to you. Is there reluctance to believe because of the lack of evidence, or is it because of this anti-authority mindset that we have? The second is this: guard against false influences. What teachings are shaping you? How are you being shaped and molded? Is it a false belief? Is it a cultural pressure? Is it a tradition, a religious tradition that you grew up in? Like that, we talked about that a few weeks ago. Maybe these traditions that we thought were like the things that you do, and if you don't do this, you're actually not a Christian. Are those shaping you and your understanding and your perception of God? What are the sources of life that are actually discipling you? Brandon and I are talking about this in between the message. He's like, you should give an example of that. And I was like, my first thought was like, I don't know, Instagram. That's just discipling me constantly, just scrolling there. Maybe you're, okay, fine, whatever, fine. You guys aren't into social media, that's fine. Maybe it's Netflix. Maybe you're watching something that you know you shouldn't be watching, and it's actually just kind of corroding your mind and your heart. And it's kind of like desensitizing you to the things that God actually hates. Is it somebody that you're hanging out with that you know you shouldn't be hanging out with? Your example, well, I'm discipling them, and it's actually they're discipling you. Those people can only be those people for so long until you're also those people. So who is influencing you? What is influencing you? If you're in here today and you're not a believer, would you consider exploring who Jesus really is and not who you've been told by other people that he is? And the third is this: share truth. Share the truth that you have. How are you helping others know Christ? We say this all the time: faith is personal, but it's not private. Faith is meant to be shared. Invest in relationships. Have gospel-centered conversations. Invite somebody to church. We have Easter invite cards. We talked about that. This is the best time to invite somebody. People are so open to a church invitation this time of year. And if you're in here today, you're not a believer, would you maybe take a next step? Ask questions. We have Group Connect next week. Find a community, a gospel-centered community where you can, be open and ask honest questions and just be around people who can help to shape your life and mold you more into the image of Jesus.